Hello everyone, in this video I'll be showing you the most overpowered one-handed sword feathering build in Wuchang Fallen Feathers. Now one-handed swords are relatively weak, however feathering can make them absolutely crazy because they are spell casting weapons, but the Zhanlu sword and the plumed grace actually have some very powerful skills. As you can see there, that skill absolutely shreds down enemies' health bars really quickly with some feathering buildup. You can do a lot with this build and I'll show you everything about it. First, starting with weapons, the plumed grace is a new game plus weapon, but it is very powerful, adding a whopping 48 bonus to your spell power at this level here. The Zhanlu sword you can get during your game, and it's going to be the strongest if you want to focus on melee attacking. Now we can also, there's only 3 weapons in the game that do feathering damage, so you're kind of limited to those 2, and the Serpent's Fang here, which is another weapon that scales with 3 in feathering there, and it also deals the feathering damage. So the longswords are a good tree to build into as they do have feathering in their tree, so we will use the one-handed sword and we can later on spec into this. But overall, I think that if you're going to go for an early game weapon, the Dark Frost Edge is hard to go wrong with because it gives you the evasive maneuver, which is very useful because then you can get an extra dodge and cast feathering spells, which we'll get into in just a moment. The Astral Blade is more so focused on magic, but you can still go with it for a feathering build. It just scaled off magic a lot better, and you're better off going with the Dark Frost Edge until you can get the Zhanlu sword, which has really great scaling. The spell power bonuses aren't as high as with the plumed grace, but the plumed grace, you can use the sacrifice ability to boost up your attacks quite a bit, which I'll show you here, because it pairs very well with the divine might. So this increases the damage of your next attack. So the way you go about doing that is start off with a sacrifice here, so using the plumed grace to buff yourself up, and then you can do a massive amount of damage, although you may get one shot otherwise. After doing that, you can use some of your more damaging spells, like precasting the divine might to further boost the next attack. And then in New Game Plus, the Echo Yanzi here is going to be extremely useful because the damage is massive when you cast this. It has a 3 Skyborn Might cost, and it can trigger Alacrity to further increase your spell casting. It's got a 6 scaling in its feathering, so it's one of the highest scaling in feathering. Earlier on in the game, Demon Bane Strike, this is extremely useful against any humanoid type boss in the game. It'll knock them down, and it's also really good against the demons you fight. As well, Echo Looping Zhang, earliest game feathering spell that's going to be useful. It has a 3 scaling in Scabbard Might. However, there is a skill tree that gives you a reduced cost to 2, and you can also trigger Alacrity with this. So early game, bosses like Hong Lang can be wiped out pretty easily by casting this quite a bit. So all the way through the game, you have a lot of really great spells. The Echo of the Soulwood is an okay option too because it can build up corruption. Echo of Hong Liu can actually stun some humanoid type bosses like the Bow Sorceress, which allows you to get another backstab attack off. Echo of Hong Lang is also an extremely useful spell, but if you're at the end game, the other spell that you get for beating the game I think is a little bit better, but this is also quite powerful too. As always, the Echo of Bow Magus, extremely effective for blocking 3 attacks worth of damage. It has a 4 Skyborn Might, which is reduced to 3 later on. If you use the skill tree, it's extremely useful. Definitely use this one often. Call of the Wild is not a bad option. It does have some feathering damage that tracks onto enemies. And the Crimson Edge has the lowest cost, and it'll recover some of your health too, so it could be beneficial as well while we're exploring or fighting lesser enemies. As for armor, the Ceramic Jar will boost your overall acquisition of the level up XP, so by 20%, worth using it. And for armor, it's really the best available, but the Ghost Warrior Vambraces are going to be the best against any weapon type damage that you'll be taking because they have the most in the slash and stab. And then anything like you see here, they got the highest with 26 in slash or stab and 28 in stab. But if you go with any of the options that have high feathering for damage, any bosses that deal that damage type, that's going to be the best available. And the Crimson Pendant is a essential one, is it increases your weapon's feathering damage. And you can further pair this with the Kylan Pendant, as this is only going to apply to 3 weapons, increase your weapon's feathering damage at the cost of reducing its physical, which is more than fine unless you're fighting something that resists feathering damage. Large bosses, you can also use something like the Fiend Felling Pendant. The Tiger Pendant is also nice to increase your physical attack, but I find that it's better to go with something like anything that's going to increase your maximum stamina, like the Dragonfish works well. The Twin Infant will increase your stamina recovery speed, which I also found to be extremely useful on any type of build. And then also if you wanted to go with something like the Draco Lich against bosses that have a flinch attack, you kind of need to use that for them. And every time that you're at a shrine, make sure you invoke and grab plumed branches. They're just extremely useful throughout the entire game. Now, as for the skill tree, there's a lot of great choices here. I'll be taking you through the start of the game all the way through to level 100, which is where we're at here now, and then where to put your stats past 100. The first stack you should always grab is the increasing your Skyborn Might by 2, grabbing your health potions, And then I would actually recommend going into the one-handed skill tree. There's actually one that we don't want to select here. So this one will give us the Skyborn Might and biding time. This is a big component of the one-handed swords. This will give us stacks of Skyborn Might. We build up more biding time, and then we get the Skyborn Might even more quickly. Do not buy Wind Force. This makes sure your charge heavy attack comes in quicker at the cost of one Skyborn Might. This is the worst charge heavy attack in the game. Don't grab that. It's definitely not worth it. Now, I'd actually recommend going down here and grabbing the +5 to your feathering and then being able to buff up your weapon. That's one of the first things we want to do. And then come back over this way. Well, above 50% madness, you take reduced damage while swift drawing. You can use the other weapons and swift draw, but I would recommend grabbing the +5 vitality. And then actually going down here. Well, above 50% madness, you gain 1 stack of Skyborn Might when you get alacrity, which is that spell you can see right down there is the Echo of Lubing Zhang, which is one that we're going to be using early game. And then we're going to go here and grab this while above 90% madness and try to always be as high as you can with madness. The buff provided by biding times cannot decay below 3 stacks, meaning you're going to always be gaining Skyborn Might quicker. At this point, you can also increase the build up if you're focusing on one of them. I don't fully recommend it, and I would recommend actually, getting your health potions up too. And at this point, it's actually best to focus more into the skill tree. So we're going to continue down over here. One of the first ones we can go for a Swift Lunge. That's an okay skill. It gives us some range. We also get a +5 to agility. And then this is not a bad choice early game. You'll likely be using Dark Frost Edge, so you can put that on there. And then we can grab this to give ourselves an extra attack, which has Clash, and then also Frostbite build up at above 90% madness. So we always want to be at that 90% madness because we get the extra biding time. And then we're going to continue up here at above 90% madness. The final attack of a one-handed combo grants 1 stack of Skyborn Might if it hits an enemy. Yeah, we want that. And we also want to continue down to get the extra weapon buffs here so we can fully upgrade our weapon. At this point, it's best to go back into this side of the skill tree and continue down here. We can go with an increased, when we're at 90% madness, the final strike of our final late attack combo gives us healing, extremely useful. This will also give us stamina come getting the Skyborn Might. And we can spec into one of these here. Now, there's a few good ones here. I like Poise Break as it kind of works like bleed in this game. And the weapons that we selected, Zhanlu Sword and Plume Grace, do get buffed up while selecting this. But we can also go down here and grab Feathering, and I would recommend this because this will give us when above 50% madness, the Skyborn Might cost of casting Echo type spells is reduced by 1. So with this, we're able to cast things like the Echo Lubing Zhang with only 2 Skyborn Might costs. And then here we'll grab the Feathering and add this to the weapon because we can't use fire on either of these weapons, so we have to use the Feathering Temperaments. And we're going to continue down and grab an increased charge of it in the accurate points, which gives you more upgrades onto your weapon. At this point, it's also good to continue down here and grab increased Skyborn Might stacks by 1. And this one, if you're going to use spells that cost 4 or more Skyborn Might, we can't be interrupted while casting them. Very useful. And this one will increase our Feathering attack power when at above 50% madness. So we want that, and we, again, always want to be at above 90 or 50 there. That's at the very minimum 50% madness. At this point, though, I think it's best to go back into our Feathering skill tree here. We can grab the Vanguard Breaker, and then we can get a boost to our Poise Break with it, and then also it enables a light hand combo afterwards. Then continue down grabbing more Feathering nodes here to gain more damage, and then the Agility node and the Swift Blade here so we can increase our weapon damage. To further increase our weapon, we're also going to grab the 2 magic ones here and grab this all the way up. It's just kind of necessary at this point. And by here, I think it's best to actually go back into this skill tree and continue on down because there's another health potion upgrade. And then once we get here, we can increase our Skyborn Might and then grab a few more Feathering. So this will give us a huge boost to our overall damage and spell casting. Then we can go here and grab another Acupoints, which is always nice. And also grab the Temperaments charge +1 there. We can also go back to the skill tree here and get the conversion, which increases your swift draws are more potent at 50% madness. When at 90%, they become even more potent. And then here will give us, if you are using any weapon that can deflect, we can go with this because we're going to go into the longsword skill tree here, which is good because it has Feathering. It does have strength, which is kind of useless for us. But if we go down into the left-hand side, there's a Feathering spec here that we can grab. And if you want to upgrade the weapon, you can, but here there's another boost to our Feathering. And then continuing on down here, we can grab a weapon here, which will give you Corruption buildup if you want to put that on the Serpent's Fang longsword that we can pair this with. But if not, we just got ourselves a bonus to our Feathering, so that's good too. If you want, you can also grab the Sword Counter, which is the parry, which gives you the deflection ability. This is good against some bosses. You can put that on the Serpent's Fang as well. Otherwise, I'd recommend actually going down into the Spear, grabbing the +2 agility, and then going into the Great Axe and grabbing the +5 to vitality and +5 to endurance. These are just quick, easy stats we can grab. And I also like to go in and grab the +5 to agility that comes from the dual blades, as dual blades are also a good weapon to pair this with. Dual blades are some of the best in the game. They do have agility in here, which we can use to buff up our weapon damage, but I think it's actually best to continue on with adding a few others in. Like into the spear tree here, we can get further increase to our endurance and our agility here. And if we continue down here, you can get a +5 to your endurance as well, which is very useful. And you can also wrap this around here as there's a +5 vitality, or we can swap through some other ways here. If we want to just maximize the amount of stats that we grab, we're going to go around. The long way does give us a boost to our strength a bit too, but the +5 vitality is nice. We can then return to the left-hand side and then go down here to grab the other fire points, and then the final acupoint temperance. We can fully boost up our weapon, and you can grab the extra mana flash charge if you want to. Not fully necessary, but it may be just worthwhile for that. There's a +1 to endurance there, and then the final increase to our mana potency. And then we can return back to the longsword to get another boost to our agility in this tree here. And then if you want to, you can also grab the crescent moon, which is not a bad option, or just the increase there to our damage. So that's what the skill tree looks like. As mentioned, with the plumed grace, we want to use this attack here to boost up our power of our next spell. And then we can swap around to the divine might here, and then go ahead with casting something very powerful like the final spell that you get in the game. And this is going to be enhanced further because this weapon has the sacrifice, and then on top of it you also have that boost. So you can, once you get out of the binding, you can then go ahead with a very powerful casting of this spell here. So we are getting rocked, but we'll go ahead with the casting, which does massive amounts of damage, 17. And boom, there's another one going off. It does massive amounts of damage. The plumed grace sword doesn't do a whole lot of damage on its attacks, but the Zhanlu sword is going to be much more potent, so we can swap out to that at any point. The damage from that, you can see there, you hit 400 damage without the temperaments active, and then when you apply the temperaments, the damage is just absurd. So yeah, you can one-shot these, which have about 500 health. So yeah, 488 on that enemy there. Depending on the enemy's resistances, the damage you do with this is insane. The best attack, if you're going to be using this, is to do dodge attacks, because you get a bit of a stabbing motion from it, which is really effective for reaching far away. You can see there, we're just shredding through everything. Zhanlu sword's damage is nuts, and with the plumed grace, you got a great casting sword. Early game, you got the dark frost edge to give yourself a dash. There's a lot of great things with this build. If you got any questions, let me know in the comments. Hit the subscribe button below if you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video.